In the early hours of January 29, 2022, a quiet suburban street in Canton, Massachusetts, became the scene of a chilling discovery. The body of John O'Keefe, a respected Boston police officer, was found lifeless in a snowbank outside a house on Fairview Road. This shocking find would soon unravel into a complex and controversial case, gripping the community and raising many questions. John O'Keefe, a 46-year-old officer known for his dedication and service, had been in a relationship with Karen Reed for 2 years. Karen, a financial lecturer at Bentley University, was known for her academic achievements and professional demeanor. Their seemingly stable relationship would come under intense scrutiny as details of that fateful night began to emerge. What could have led to John's untimely death? Was it a tragic accident in the early morning hours, a heated argument gone horribly wrong, or something more sinister involving individuals who were meant to uphold the law? As investigators delved deeper, the case presented multiple theories, each more intriguing and disturbing than the last. With numerous twists and turns, this case would challenge perceptions and highlight potential flaws in the justice system. John O'Keefe was a dedicated officer with the Boston Police Department, known for his commitment to his job and his community. At 46 years old, he had spent over 2 decades serving the people of Boston, earning respect from his colleagues and the citizens he protected. John was described as a diligent and hardworking individual, always going the extra mile in his duties. He was not just a cop. He was a mentor to younger officers and a familiar, trusted face in his neighborhood. John's personal life seemed just as stable as his professional one. He was in a 2-year relationship with Karen Reed, a 44-year-old financial lecturer at Bentley University. Karen was well regarded in her academic field, known for her sharp mind and dedication to her students. She held a respectable position and had a successful career. Despite her professional accomplishments, Karen had a more troubled personal history, particularly with alcohol-related issues. These issues, however, did not seem to overshadow her professional life or her relationship with John. Karen and John's relationship appeared strong to those who knew them. They met through mutual friends and quickly grew close, finding common ground in their shared values and dedication to their respective careers. They were often seen together at social events and family gatherings, presenting the image of a stable, loving couple. However, like any relationship, theirs had its ups and downs. Friends noted that they sometimes argued, especially when alcohol was involved, but these disputes never seemed severe enough to raise alarms. John had met Brian through Jennifer, and over time, they had become friends. That night, the group socialized until the early hours of January 29th. Karen's history with alcohol played a significant role in the events of that night. Witnesses noted that she was visibly drunk, a state that might have influenced her perception and memory of the evening's events. Despite this, Karen was adamant about her version of the story, insisting that she saw John enter the house. The relationship between Karen and John had seen its share of conflicts, primarily revolving around Karen's drinking habits. Friends mentioned that John had tried to help Karen manage her drinking, but it remained a point of contention between them. On several occasions, their arguments would escalate, but they always seemed to reconcile afterward. As the night progressed, what should have been a routine gathering of friends turned into a nightmare. Karen's account of the evening clashed with those of Brian and Jennifer, adding a layer of complexity to the investigation. The discrepancies in their stories became a focal point for the authorities as they tried to piece together the events that led to John's death. In summary, John O'Keefe was a respected police officer whose life was cut short under mysterious circumstances. Karen Reed, his partner, was a successful academic with a troubled past, particularly with alcohol. Their relationship, though loving, had its difficulties, which played a significant role in the tragic events of that night. The conflicting accounts of that evening from Karen and others present at Brian's house would become crucial in the ensuing investigation. On the evening of January 28, 2022, Karen Reed and John O'Keefe planned to spend time with friends. They started their night at the Waterfall Bar, a popular local spot. The group enjoyed drinks and conversations, setting a relaxed tone for the evening. Karen and John were in good spirits, mingling with their friends. After leaving the Waterfall Bar, they decided to continue the night at the home of Brian Albert, a fellow Boston cop and acquaintance of John. John had known Brian through his sister-in-law, Jennifer. The gathering at Brian's house was meant to be a casual one, a chance to unwind and enjoy each other's company. The guests at Brian's house included Brian, his wife Nicole, Jennifer, her husband Matthew, and Darren. They arrived around 11 o'clock in the evening. The group settled in and drinks were served. Laughter and chatter filled the room as they shared stories and relaxed. Karen, known to drink socially, was visibly intoxicated as the night progressed. John, however, remained composed. They interacted with the others, moving around the house and joining different conversations. At one point, Karen mentioned she saw John walking into Brian's house. This detail would later become a contentious point in the investigation. Brian and Jennifer both insisted that John never entered the house. They claimed to have texted him multiple times without receiving a response. This contradiction between Karen's account and Brian and Jennifer's statements added a layer of complexity to the case. As the clock approached midnight, the group continued to drink and socialize. Karen and John had a brief argument, witnessed by a few friends, but it seemed to blow over quickly. These minor disputes were not uncommon between them, especially when alcohol was involved. Around 1 a.m. on January 29th, Karen decided to leave. She called out to John, but there was no response. Assuming he had already gone inside, she headed home. She later mentioned in phone conversations that she could have hit him with her car, but wasn't sure. This statement, along with her visibly distressed state, raised questions about what had happened after she left. By 2 a.m., most guests had either left or settled down. The atmosphere had quieted, and Brian's house was no longer buzzing with activity. Brian and Jennifer, maintaining their stance, insisted John never entered. The tension from the earlier argument had dissipated, leaving a seemingly normal end to a night out. The initial police response involved questioning all the guests. Brian, Jennifer, Nicole, Matthew, and Darren were all asked about their recollections of the night. Their stories mostly aligned, except for the crucial detail of whether John entered the house. Karen's account differed significantly. She insisted she saw John walk inside. This discrepancy raised suspicions and questions about what really happened. The broken taillight from Karen's SUV found near John's body was another key piece of evidence. It suggested a collision, but the exact nature of the incident remained unclear. The investigators faced the challenge of piecing together these conflicting stories. They had to consider the possibility of memory lapses due to intoxication and the potential for deliberate misdirection. The statements from Brian and Jennifer, both firm in their claims, stood in stark contrast to Karen's distressed and uncertain account. As the investigation progressed, the timeline of events became critical. From the group's arrival at Brian's house to Karen's departure and the eventual discovery of John's body, every minute was scrutinized. The timestamps on text messages, phone calls, and witness statements were all analyzed to create a coherent narrative. Despite the various accounts, certain facts were undeniable. John O'Keefe, a respected officer, was found dead under suspicious circumstances. Karen Reed, his partner of 2 years, was now at the center of a complex investigation, with her statements and actions being closely examined. The events of that night, filled with social interactions, alcohol, and conflicting memories, set the stage for what would become a highly debated and scrutinized case. The simple night out with friends had turned into a tragedy, leaving many questions unanswered and a community in shock. At 6 a.m. on January 29, 2022, Karen Reed discovered John O'Keefe's body in a snowbank outside Brian Albert's house. The sight was shocking and unexpected. John, a respected Boston police officer, lay lifeless in the cold, partially covered by snow. Karen, in a state of panic and confusion, immediately called for help, her voice trembling as she explained the situation. When the emergency services arrived, Karen was visibly distressed. She kept repeating, "I hit him! I hit him!" over and over, struggling to process what had happened. Her statement suggested a sense of guilt and confusion, but she was also adamant that she did not fully understand how John ended up in the snowbank. The paramedics quickly assessed John's condition. He had no pulse, and his body showed signs of severe trauma, including a blunt force injury. They attempted resuscitation, but it was clear that John had been dead for several hours. The exact time of his death would later be determined during the autopsy, but the initial assessment suggested he had died sometime in the early morning hours. As the paramedics worked, the police began to secure the scene. Officers cordoned off the area around the snowbank and started gathering evidence. They noted the broken taillight from Karen's SUV near John's body, which immediately raised questions about a possible collision. The scene was carefully photographed, and the position of John's body was documented. Karen was questioned briefly at the scene. She reiterated her earlier statements, saying that she might have hit John with her car, but wasn't sure. Her memory of the events was hazy, likely affected by the alcohol she had consumed and the shock of finding John's body. The officers noted her emotional state and decided to take her in for further questioning at the police station. The initial observations by the police and paramedics painted a grim picture. John's injuries were severe, and the presence of the broken taillight suggested a violent impact. The snowbank where he was found was examined for additional clues, but the freezing temperatures and snow made it difficult to gather clear evidence. Back at the police station, Karen was placed in an interview room where she would be questioned in more detail. The discovery of John's body had set off a series of events that would lead to a thorough investigation, as authorities sought to understand what had happened in the early hours of January 29th. The investigation into John O'Keefe's death began immediately after the discovery of his body. The autopsy and forensic reports were the first steps in understanding what had happened. The medical examiner determined that John had suffered blunt force trauma and a severe traumatic injury to his head, which were consistent with being struck by a vehicle. These findings supported the initial suspicion that he had been hit by Karen's SUV. Near John's body, investigators found broken taillight fragments from Karen's vehicle. This discovery was significant because it directly connected her car to the scene. The taillight fragments were carefully collected and analyzed, confirming that they matched Karen's SUV. This evidence suggested that there had been a collision, but the exact circumstances remained unclear. Key witness statements added further complexity to the case. One witness reported seeing Karen and John inside her car late that night. The witness did not hear any crashes or loud noises, which raised questions about the alleged collision. This statement suggested that if Karen had hit John, it was not loud enough to attract immediate attention. Investigators also examined data from John's Apple Health app, which tracked his steps. The data showed that John had taken many steps before his death, conflicting with the theory that he had been hit by a car. If John had been struck by the SUV, he would likely not have been able to walk afterward. This discrepancy added another layer of mystery to the investigation. Karen's behavior and statements were scrutinized closely. She repeatedly claimed that she might have hit John, but wasn't sure. Her distressed state and the influence of alcohol complicated her recollection of events. Investigators had to consider whether her statements were genuine admissions of guilt or the result of confusion and panic. Forensic evidence played a crucial role in the investigation. The broken taillight fragments were a key piece of evidence. The positioning and nature of the damage suggested a significant impact. However, the defense argued that for such severe injuries to occur, the car would have needed to be traveling at a high speed, which was unlikely given the conditions in the residential area. Additionally, scratches were found on John's arm. The defense suggested these might have been caused by Brian Albert's German Shepherd, which had been present at the house. This theory was supported by the fact that the dog was taken out of the city shortly after John's death. The investigators had to determine whether these scratches were relevant to the cause of death or a separate incident. One of the major challenges in the investigation was the lack of CCTV footage from key locations. The house across from Brian's belonged to the Canton deputy chief, who had CCTV cameras that could have captured the events. However, these cameras were not requested for review, and the deputy chief claimed they did not record anything useful. This absence of footage made it difficult to piece together the complete timeline. Another suspicious element was the deletion of phone calls between Jennifer and Brian. Richard Green, another investigator, found that hours before John's body was discovered, someone had searched "How long to die in a cold" from Jennifer's phone. Despite having Jennifer's phone for over a year, the prosecution never examined it thoroughly. These actions raised questions about potential cover-ups or interference in the investigation. Brian Albert's involvement also came under scrutiny. As a trained boxer with personal ties to the Canton PD, his role in charging Karen and finding the broken taillight was seen as potentially biased. His close relationship with key figures in the case added to the suspicion that the investigation might not be entirely impartial. The investigators faced significant turning points as they continued to gather evidence. Each new piece of information seemed to contradict previous findings, making it difficult to form a coherent narrative. The broken taillight, for instance, clearly indicated a collision, but the lack of loud noises and John's step data suggested otherwise. The investigation also had to consider the broader implications of the case. John's death was not just a personal tragedy, but also a significant event for the Boston Police Department and the local community. The pressure to find answers was immense, and the conflicting stories made it even more challenging. As the case progressed, it became clear that the truth was buried under layers of conflicting evidence and potential misconduct. The lack of CCTV footage, the deleted phone records, and the involvement of individuals with personal connections to the case all contributed to a sense of unease and suspicion. The legal proceedings against Karen Reed began with significant attention from the media and the public. Initially, Karen was charged with manslaughter, but as the investigation progressed, the charges were elevated to second-degree murder. The prosecution argued that Karen had hit John O'Keefe with her SUV after a heated argument while she was under the influence of alcohol. Karen, maintaining her innocence, pleaded not guilty and was released on $50,000 bail. The prosecution's case was built on the premise that Karen and John had an argument, leading to John getting out of the car. In a fit of rage, the prosecution claimed, Karen reversed the SUV and struck John, leaving him to die in the snowbank. They presented forensic evidence, including the broken taillight fragments found at the scene, which matched Karen's SUV. This evidence was crucial in their argument that Karen's vehicle was directly involved in the incident. To bolster their case, the prosecution highlighted Karen's own statements made shortly after the incident. She had repeatedly said that she might have hit John, which the prosecution interpreted as an admission of guilt. They also pointed to her visibly distressed state and the influence of alcohol, suggesting that she was not fully aware of her actions at the time. The defense, on the other hand, argued that Karen was being framed. They pointed to several inconsistencies in the evidence. First, they questioned the location of the broken taillight. For such severe injuries to occur, the car would have needed to be traveling at a high speed, which seemed unlikely given the residential area and the lack of loud noises or crashes heard by witnesses. Moreover, the defense emphasized the absence of clear CCTV footage from key locations. The defense suggested that the lack of this footage raised serious doubts about the integrity of the investigation. Additionally, the deleted phone calls between Jennifer and Brian and the suspicious Google search about how long it takes to die in the cold added to their argument that there was more to the case than met the eye. During the trial, several key witnesses and experts provided testimonies. One witness testified that they saw Karen and John inside the car late that night, but did not hear any crashes or loud noises. This testimony supported the defense's claim that a high-speed collision was unlikely. Another expert analyzed the data from John's Apple Health app, which showed that John had taken many steps before his death, contradicting the theory that he had been incapacitated by a car accident. The defense also called attention to the scratches found on John's arm. They suggested that these could have been caused by Brian Albert's German Shepherd, which was present at the house. The dog had been taken out of the city shortly after John's death, raising further suspicions. The defense argued that this evidence pointed to the possibility of an altercation involving the dog, rather than a car accident. Forensic experts provided detailed analyses of the broken taillight fragments. They confirmed that the fragments matched Karen's SUV, but also noted that the damage's positioning and nature suggested a low-speed impact. This contradicted the prosecution's claim of a high-speed collision and raised questions about the exact circumstances of the incident. As the trial progressed, the defense continued to highlight the inconsistencies and missing evidence. They pointed to the prosecution's failure to thoroughly examine Jennifer's phone, despite having it for over a year. This oversight, they argued, indicated a lack of thoroughness in the investigation and a potential bias against Karen. The current status of the trial remains unresolved, with ongoing legal battles and appeals. The defense has filed motions to suppress certain pieces of evidence, arguing that they were improperly handled or collected. Meanwhile, the prosecution continues to push for a conviction, maintaining that the evidence clearly points to Karen's guilt. Throughout the proceedings, Karen has remained adamant about her innocence. She has spent thousands on her defense, determined to clear her name. The trial has drawn significant public attention, with many people divided on whether Karen is guilty or the victim of a frame-up. The legal battles continue, and the final outcome remains uncertain, leaving the community in a state of suspense and the search for truth ongoing. The immediate aftermath of the trial was a turbulent time for both Karen Redd and John O'Keefe's family. Karen, who had spent thousands on her defense, faced an uncertain future. Her professional reputation as a financial lecturer at Bentley University was in jeopardy, and she dealt with public scrutiny and legal battles. Despite being released on bail, the ongoing legal proceedings cast a long shadow over her life. John O'Keefe's family, meanwhile, was left to cope with the loss of a beloved son, brother, and uncle. The trial had reopened fresh wounds, and the conflicting narratives only added to their grief. The community mourned the loss of a respected police officer, and the family sought justice for John, grappling with the possibility that they might never know the full truth about his death. The broader impact on the Boston Police Department was significant. The case brought unwanted attention and raised questions about the department's internal relationships and procedures. Brian Albert's involvement, coupled with the alleged mishandling of evidence and the lack of critical CCTV footage, led to calls for greater transparency and accountability within the department. The Canton Police Department also faced scrutiny, particularly concerning the integrity of the investigation. Public reaction was deeply divided. Some people believed Karen was guilty, convinced by the prosecution's argument and the forensic evidence presented. Others saw Karen as a victim of a flawed investigation and potential framing, highlighting the inconsistencies and missing evidence. This division was evident in the community, with discussions and debates happening both online and offline. The media coverage further fueled these discussions. News outlets provided continuous updates on the trial, and social media platforms buzzed with opinions and theories. Supporters of Karen rallied around her, raising funds for her legal defense and advocating for her innocence. On the other hand, those who believed in her guilt pushed for a swift and decisive conviction. The ongoing discussions about the case also sparked broader conversations about the criminal justice system and the potential for bias and misconduct. People questioned the reliability of forensic evidence, the thoroughness of police investigations, and the role of personal relationships in the administration of justice. Subsequent legal developments continued to unfold. Motions to suppress evidence, appeals, and potential retrials kept the case in the public eye. The legal battle was far from over, and the outcome remained uncertain. Each new development brought fresh waves of speculation and debate, ensuring that the case stayed a focal point in the community's consciousness. In the end, the case of Karen Redd and John O'Keefe left an indelible mark on all involved. It highlighted the complexities of the legal system, the impact of personal relationships on justice, and the deep divisions within the community. As the search for truth continued, so did the hope that justice, in whatever form it might take, would eventually be served. Thank you for watching this detailed exploration of the Karen Redd and John O'Keefe case. If you found this video informative and thought-provoking, please consider subscribing to our channel for more true crime stories. Don't forget to like this video and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update. We'd love to hear your thoughts and theories about this case, so please leave your comments below. Your engagement helps us continue to bring you in-depth content on the most intriguing cases. Stay tuned for more.